Hello, in this video, I'm going to talk about three life events that are surprising sources of grief for a lot of people, and one life event that a lot of people expect to be a source of grief, but often isn't. Stay tuned. Welcome to Wellness with John. I'm John Peters, and these are resources to help you thrive. So, in this video, I want to talk about three life events that are, for a lot of people, sources of grief, but I call them surprising or sneaky sources of grief because the way that we frame these life events and the way that then people relate to them because of how they're framing them often causes people to actually be surprised at some point when they realize that they're going through a grief process, or sometimes people are having difficulties that they don't even identify as a grief process. And I find this with a lot of people who have ended up coming to me in therapy and talking about their reactions to these life events. And it actually is a grief process. So let's get into it and I'll explain. So, one life event that often causes a grief process that people don't expect, even though people expect part of it, but they don't necessarily expect the totality of it and the impact it can have on them, is retiring from work. So, sometimes people get to retirement age, and I'm not talking here about losing a job, getting fired, the adjustment with promotions and things like that. That could be a whole separate video. But here, what I'm talking about is retirement from work at the person's expected retirement age. So let's say someone gets to be 62, 63, 65, and they decide, okay, I am at retirement age. I'm going to retire from my career and do the thing that I had been imagining was going to be my retirement. Well, for a lot of people, um, the way that is framed on the front end often has to do with these positive types of outcomes that they're going to get at retirement, which is I no longer have to go into work, or I can pursue my hobbies, or I can just not have to get up in the morning. I can chill, and if you ask someone who is pre-retirement, looking forward to retirement, how they frame it, most people are not dreading retirement. The people who have awareness that they actually have resistance to retirement, those people generally just don't retire because there are lots of options for people to delay their retirement or just continue working in their same field and switch even if they retire in on paper from their main job. So people who don't want to retire, who don't see it as positive, typically just don't do it. But a lot of people look forward to retirement and have this idea I can travel more, whatever it happens to be. So they have this positive frame of the life event, and then they get to the thing, excuse me, and they ended up making the transition, but then they start reacting to the adjustments. Okay. So grief is the psychological reaction to change or loss. Okay. That's the broad definition of grief. And obviously, we react all the time to all sorts of changes. If the temperature in this room changes, I might sweat, right? So we react to changes, but grief is a constellation of issues that we see when someone's undergoing a major change or loss. And we call it grief because there are certain normal kinds of reactions that people often will have, even though there's a lot of variety of how people react to change or loss. But you can talk about grief as a thing, grief as a process. All right. So that's kind of my broad view of what is grief and why am I talking about it in this video related to these changes. So people get to retirement and their life changes. And one of the reasons that people experience this sneaky kind of grief is because when people experience the challenges of adjusting to the changes, I think often people then, if you listen to this in the language of how people are describing it, they're coming back to the frame like, okay, I retired. I'm supposed to be enjoying myself. Okay. So implicit in that frame is retirement is on balance a good thing, and what I'm reacting to is the retirement, the whole thing, right? But this is one of the reasons that things can be sneaky in how the grief reaction shows up, is when we're reacting to kind of the thing as code for the basket of all the different elements of the thing, and then we're deciding how to react to it based on the frame. And what I mean by that is if a person says, okay, yes, it was a good idea to retire, and now I'm at retirement, and now I'm going to think about what does it mean to be retired. As long as we're using that top level kind of global language to refer to the whole thing, we're not necessarily getting into, okay, now I don't have my weekly pattern that I was following for the last few decades in terms of my daily activities. I don't have the social interaction with my coworkers that I was easily having in my work setting for years and years and years, and an easy kind of friendly banter with people, and even social support that people get from coworkers, right? Even though people may have saved adequately for retirement, people are adjusting to a different income, right? Often at the time of retirement compared to what they were getting when they were working. People might now be at home with a great deal more time with their spouse per day than they were having when they were working. And so each of these changes is its own thing with its own adjustments, all right? But we lump all those things in and we just say, I retired, or my retirement, and we're referring to the whole basket, right? And we have a frame through which we view either how we are experiencing that whole basket or how we think we should be experiencing the whole basket. But the problem is, if you zoom in on each of those elements, there's some of the elements that really don't fit the frame, okay? Maybe the general frame is a positive one, like, yeah, it's great to be retired because I don't have to get up in the morning at the same time the way I used to necessarily, or whatever it happens to be. But the thing is that the individual adjustments often do then produce a grief reaction. So, um, people sometimes then neglect to uh, deal with that grief reaction, because what happens is the brain comes back and says, hey, I'm retired, I'm supposed to be enjoying this. But the thing is, there are lots of elements of that that may be frankly troubling, may be difficult for them to adjust to, because one of the tasks of grief is adjusting to the change, like literally accommodating the change, both instrumentally in terms of being able to deal with it in a very direct sense, but also in terms of identity. Like, this is who I am, this is who I want to be. I am a person who exists post change. Okay, that's one of the tasks of grief. And then on the emotional level is being able to have emotions and have them make some sort of sense, and to have them in a constructive way, and have the emotions not make us too miserable, and also be enlivening in the sense that they, even if they are challenging, in some ways that they promote growth, right? So, so with retirement, often people get X number of weeks or months into retirement and feel miserable, and then they question, like, where's this coming from? You know, this is supposed to be good, and I don't like this, and what am I going to do about this now? And so retirement is something that I have found over the years that many people have come to therapy to talk about as an adjustment. And often, at least initially, when people come in, the reason I talk about the frame is that people often are referring to their retirement, okay? And it usually is a stumbling block in terms of them kind of making the overall grief adjustment and dealing with that effectively, because they aren't necessarily thinking about the significant impact of particular elements that go into the thing that we're calling retirement, right? Again, within the thing we refer to with code, with that one word, retirement, is a whole bunch of different types of changes or losses that, in sum, can produce a grief reaction. All right. Okay, so the next life event that often produces this same sneaky kind of grief reaction is getting married. And this isn't true for everybody. So I'm not saying that getting married causes grief. But I am saying that this is another thing where I see this sneaky form of grief because often people are partnered with their person they're going to marry for a long period of time, and therefore they have accommodated to the relationship in lots of ways. But I do see with a significant subset of people that when they get married, the marriage ends up representing a significant change in their identity, or at the time that they get married, that things instrumentally change in their life that they have to accommodate to that weren't there prior to around the time of the wedding. So, for example, if people get married and then move, right? Or weddings are often people often situate weddings at points in life that are also articulated by other types of life changes, like finishing college or starting a new career, having a baby, things like that. And so again, what people do is they frame it as I'm getting married. This is great. I'm marrying this person I want to marry. I'm marrying this person that I'm committed to and I want to spend my life with. Um, and yet, within that, if we zoom in, we see that getting married again is a code word for a big basket of a whole bunch of different changes to which the person has to adjust. Okay, and also the partner is simultaneously in a process of adjustment, often to changes as well. And that sometimes is surprising to people when they get married, and they may on balance feel good about the marriage. I'm not talking about like soured ideas about whether the wedding was a good idea or whether the relationship is healthy, but I'm saying that even in situations where people have a reasonably healthy relationship and there are no big issues that they say, we're having trouble with our marriage. Um, when people get married, there are a lot of adjustments that go on. So again, some of those, might be blips that they quickly adjust to, but then taken together as a constellation of a whole bunch of different accommodations that a person has to do around the time of getting married, it can add up to a grief process. People can have challenges in adjusting to their new identity in their new life that has all of the different types of changes that occur around the time of the marriage. Now, again, uh, I don't see this so much when you look at the lifestyle of the two people involved, and you see that it doesn't really change a whole lot pre-marriage to post-marriage. But the reality is that if you look at actual changes, so you have around the time of the wedding, and you look at 6 months before to 6 months after, how many types of changes did the person experience around that time that required some level of adjustment? Okay, and if we add up, we have multiple types of changes and we add those up, sometimes those end up being a significant amount of adjustment that the person has to undergo, and therefore more adjustment equals more challenge in accommodating to it. It's just that's the way it works, right? And so a whole bunch of little adjustments actually could add up to a sum total of a larger adjustment, and then the person could be surprised at how stressed or unhappy they seem to be at times in their new life situation, even though they may still have a positive view of was it, should we be married and is this relationship healthy? But again, because of the positive frame, I think that it can often cause people to be surprised that they're having a grief reaction, or that they don't even recognize that their emotional reaction and their psychological reaction is a grief reaction, right? Now, kind of related to that one, but a different one is birth of the first child in a relationship. So this isn't always as true of subsequent children, but birth of the first child for a couple is very commonly a source of grief, even to the point of depression for people. And again, why is it a sneaky type of grief? Because we frame that as a positive thing, right? Who wants to admit, oh yeah, we had a baby and now I feel like life sucks, you know? So there's shame and guilt involved when people have some poignant sense of suffering related to having a kid. It's the same as the retirement, same as getting married. So when the person feels the grief, one of the reasons that people kind of neglect to attend to it in a healthy way is that the positive framing of the life event causes them to think, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I must be wrong or broken or bad to be feeling bad about this thing that's supposed to be a good thing, right? But one way to think about why birth of the first child is troubling for people is that if you take a couple and they've been together X number of months or years, and if you take each of the people in the partnership and you say, I want you individually to name the top 5 things that are the things through which you derive satisfaction with your partner. So you have 2 partners, you have each of them naming 5 things that are the most satisfying things about their relationship. So you have a total of 10 things, right? The birth of their first child is going to disrupt all 10 of those things. No two ways about it, all right? So each person has top 5 things that they like about being in the relationship with their partner. It's guaranteed the birth of the first child is going to disrupt all 10 of those things, right? So this is why a study I think about 20 years ago, they did a study where they were looking at a broad array of variables to try to predict, like, what are things we can note about relationships that help us predict loss of marital satisfaction. So when people say, my marriage was good before and now it sucks, so loss of marital satisfaction can be predicted by a variety of variables. But the number one variable, the one that has the strongest predictive value for loss of marital satisfaction, is birth of the first child, right? And this is exactly why. Because as lovely as babies are and as rewarding as parenthood can be, and I'm not poo-pooing parenthood, I'm a parent myself. Being the parent of my daughter is definitely one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my entire life. It's been deeply rewarding in ways that I didn't expect before becoming a parent. But when you become a parent for the first time, parenthood is going to change you. It's going to provide a tremendous amount of challenge in accommodating to your new role, your new identity, and it's going to challenge a lot of the things that existed prior to the onset of parenthood, prior to the birth of your first child, that were things that helped you have a sense of well-being in life. That's it. I mean, again, babies are wonderful, children are wonderful, community is wonderful, but the birth of your first child is going to challenge a lot of the core things that help you be satisfied in your life. That's the way it works. Okay. And again, people feel shame and guilt about this because they think, I'm not supposed to be feeling bad about this, right? And part of the reason I'm making this video is not to poo-poo these positive things and say, oh, it's a mixed bag, although that is true, but to say that sometimes because of the sneakiness of the grief process and because we frame it positively, which makes us neglect paying attention to how we're reacting to things and adjusting to things, and then also that extra element of shame and guilt, it means that sometimes people kind of swirl around in a grief process for a really protracted period of time, right? I talked to an example of this as I talked to a patient recently who's a parent of their first child, and their child's now 4 years old, and they've basically been experiencing a grief process for the whole 4 years that they couldn't really identify and work with constructively in order to work through it and to think about, like, why am I thinking these things and feeling these ways and being irritable and having these different types of reactions. But when we talked about it, the person did have a lot of significant challenges in making the adjustment into parenthood. Even though they were making the adjustment instrumentally, they were performing quite well as a parent. but they were definitely having something we could call a grief process that was very protracted, and not surprisingly, because it really changed their own life. It changed their relationship with their partner, the other parent, right? And it collectively kind of provided some challenges for them as a couple. So again, some life events we frame positively, but they're mixed bags. The answer to the so what question of what do we do about this is we sit and we contemplate our experience, and we zoom in and we take a look at, what is going on with me? What am I thinking about things? I think journaling is a good avenue of getting insight into life events and what we're thinking about them, how we're reacting to them, what the elements of those life events are, because life events are often, again, talked about in code. I retired, I got married, I had a kid. But when we sit and give ourselves some space to do, for example, journaling, we sometimes then start to identify, okay, yeah, I retired, and now I don't get to see Joe at work every day, and now I have a lot of free time that I don't know what to do with, and now I'm spending all this time with my partner, and we're kind of fighting more than we used to, because we used to spend most of each day apart at work, and now we're hanging out at home together and getting on each other's nerves. And so contemplation journaling is a way to identify what are the things I am challenged with, what are the things that I'm really finding difficult to adjust to, or that I don't really like. What do I need to do about those things? And obviously, if you're really wondering whether you are going through a grief process, or you're finding a particular challenge with a life change, talking to a therapist is a good thing to do, right? Because that's part of what we do. We help people explore and unpack experiences in order to identify the challenges and to find ways to constructively and effectively cope and to grow. But one last thing I want to talk about in this video, and by the way, if you like this kind of content, hit the like button below. And if you have yet to subscribe to my channel, please hit the subscribe button wherever it is here. But the last thing I want to talk about in this video is empty nest syndrome, because there's this lingering idea that, like, when your youngest child leaves home to move out or go to college or something, that there's this expected grief reaction that is termed empty nest syndrome. And to be honest, the people I talk to who go through that don't grieve. There are some people where they miss their kids sometimes, and where the quality of their relationship with their kid who's left changes in a way that they're not completely happy about. But the reality is, on balance, when the youngest child leaves home, it's much more of kind of a party experience. With like, yay, I don't have to drive them to school every day, and yeah, I could explore my life in some new enlivening ways. And because parenthood really is taxing on your time and your energy and financially, and so there's actually a lot of relief that comes to people when the youngest child leaves home, and a lot of new possibilities open up that, on balance, for most people, I think are actually enlivening. Now, again, does that mean nobody grieves that? I'm not saying that, but I am saying that the empty nest syndrome is kind of an overstatement in terms of what that phenomenon really is in people's lives. So anyway, thanks for joining me in this video, and I will see you in a future video soon. Bye.